Nothing prepared Craig Dawson for the awkward feeling he just experienced. He had just been set up for a blind date with someone whom his class wouldn't even let him notice. Sitting in the chair across him was his own maid, Jayla. She had also been set up for this blind date, not knowing it was her boss. He was not even close to her class, she thought. But what happened next destroyed Prejudice and sparked something different in their lives. Craig Dawson was the kind of man who lived in silence, even when surrounded by people. His mansion in New York overlooked the city lights that most people only saw in their dreams, yet he felt nothing when he looked at them. Every morning, he would wake before dawn, read business reports, and eat breakfast alone at the same long table. The house was quiet, except for the distant sound of the maid vacuuming or the faint clatter of dishes. His life ran like a clock, perfect from the outside, but empty inside. Jayla had worked for him for almost 2 years. She was soft-spoken, always polite, and never looked him in the eye for too long. He had no reason to notice her beyond her duties, but sometimes, in the quiet of the house, he would hear her hum while cleaning the hallway. There was something calm about her voice, something that made the silence less heavy. But Craig had built walls too high for anyone to climb, especially someone like her. The setup started with his cousin, Laura. She had grown tired of watching Craig turn down invitations, claiming he was too busy for love. One evening she said, "You need to stop hiding behind work. I've arranged a dinner for you. No excuses." Craig sighed and rubbed his temple. "Laura, I'm not doing this again," he said quietly, but Laura smiled, ignoring his protest. "It's already done. You'll thank me later." That same week, across town, Jayla was folding laundry in her small apartment on Cedar Avenue when her phone buzzed. It was Mia, her old friend from college. They hadn't seen each other in years, ever since Jayla's life took a turn after her mother fell ill and she had to leave school to work. Mia's voice was cheerful as always. "Jay, listen, you've been working too hard. You need to go out, have fun, meet someone nice. I've arranged something for you. A dinner. Nothing serious, just a little blind date." Jayla laughed, shaking her head. "Mia, you know I don't fit into your rich world anymore." But Mia only said, "Please, just this once. You'll thank me later." Neither woman knew they were planning the same dinner for the same man. As the day approached, Craig felt an odd sense of irritation. He hated surprises, yet something about this meeting pulled his attention. He spent the afternoon in his office, flipping through files without reading a single word. Outside, rain fell softly against the glass, and for the first time in a while, he wondered what kind of woman Laura had chosen. Meanwhile, Jayla stood in front of her small mirror, trying on the only nice dress she owned, a navy blue one from a thrift shop. Her hands trembled as she brushed her straight black hair down her shoulders. She looked simple but graceful. She told herself it didn't matter if the man didn't like her. It was just dinner, just one night away from the noise of scrubbing floors and the loneliness of her empty room. When evening came, the restaurant glowed like a scene from another world. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling, soft jazz music played, and the smell of expensive wine filled the air. Craig arrived first, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, his face calm but guarded. He was shown to a table by the window, and he sat with his phone in hand, pretending to read messages. 5 minutes later, Jayla walked in. Her heart raced as she looked around the room filled with people who looked nothing like her. She almost turned back, but a waiter approached and asked, "Miss Jayla?" She nodded shyly, following him through the tables. When she reached the table, Craig looked up, ready to greet whoever his cousin had chosen. The sight froze him. The woman standing before him looked nervous, familiar, and far too real for the world he lived in. "Jayla?" he said before he could stop himself. Her eyes widened as her breath caught. "Mr. Dawson?" she whispered. For a moment, the restaurant disappeared. It was just them, two people from different worlds, caught in a mistake neither could explain. Craig leaned back, trying to process what was happening. "You're my blind date?" he asked quietly. Jayla's voice was soft. "I didn't know it would be you, sir. My friend arranged it." Craig nodded slowly, his pride bruised, his thoughts racing. The silence between them stretched long and heavy. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Since we're here, we might as well have dinner." His tone was firm, but there was a trace of something new in his eyes, something uncertain. Jayla nodded and sat down carefully, her fingers brushing the edge of the tablecloth. As they ordered, the air between them shifted. Craig found himself stealing glances at her while she looked away. He noticed how her hands shook slightly when she picked up the glass, how her voice trembled but never lost respect. Jayla, on the other hand, could not believe she was sitting across from the man whose house she cleaned every morning. She had imagined him as unreachable, cold, yet here he was, quiet and human. The waiter poured their wine, and for a brief second, their hands touched as they both reached for the glass. Craig felt something he couldn't describe, something small but real, a crack in the distance he had built. Jayla pulled her hand back quickly, whispering, "I'm sorry." He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "No, it's all right." Outside, the rain had stopped. The city lights reflected through the window, soft and golden. Jayla looked out for a moment, and Craig followed her gaze. They sat in silence, the kind that speaks louder than words, both realizing that the night was only just beginning, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night after the blind date, neither Craig nor Jayla could sleep. Craig lay awake in his large empty room, staring at the ceiling while memories of the evening played over and over in his head. He had walked into that restaurant, expecting a simple dinner, maybe a few awkward smiles, and then another quiet ride home. But what he got instead was something that shook him in a way he couldn't explain. Jayla, too, was restless. Her tiny apartment felt even smaller that night. The soft hum of the ceiling fan couldn't quiet her racing thoughts. She couldn't believe how life had played such a cruel joke, putting her face to face with the man whose shirts she ironed every morning. It wasn't just embarrassing, it was confusing. She saw something in his eyes that night, something she had never seen before, a softness that didn't match the man she worked for. The next morning, Craig tried to push the thought aside. He returned to his routine, coffee in one hand, tablet in the other, walking down the marble hallway as though nothing had happened. But when he reached the dining room, Jayla was already there, wiping the table, pretending to be busy. For a moment, their eyes met. Time slowed. She quickly looked away, her face turning warm with embarrassment. "Good morning," Craig said quietly. His voice was calm, but she heard the hesitation. "Good morning, sir," she replied without looking up. Her voice was steady, but her heart pounded. The air between them was strange, fragile. Craig wanted to say something, to ease the tension, but words failed him. Instead, he sat down and opened the newspaper, pretending to read while his mind drifted back to her laugh at the restaurant, soft and unsure, the kind that made him forget about the rest of the world for a moment. Jayla finished her task and turned to leave, but before she could step out, Craig spoke. "Jayla, wait." She stopped, turning slowly. "Yes, sir?" Craig looked up from the paper. "I wanted to say thank you for last night. I know it must have been uncomfortable." Jayla smiled faintly, her eyes meeting his for just a second. "It was, sir, but it was also nice." Her voice trailed off as if afraid she had said too much. He nodded, unsure what to do with the warmth in his chest. "You can call me Craig, when we're not at work," he said after a pause. Her eyes widened. "I can't, sir. It wouldn't be right." He smiled softly. "Maybe not, but I'd like it if you did." She didn't answer. Instead, she gave a small nod and walked out of the room, her steps quiet against the floor. Craig watched her go, realizing for the first time that the sound of her footsteps was something he had grown used to, something that made the house feel less lonely. Days passed, and something began to change inside the mansion. Craig found himself noticing things he never had before: the scent of fresh flowers she placed on the counter, the way she hummed softly while dusting the shelves, even the small notes she left for the gardener to remind him about the roses. Her presence filled the cold spaces of his home with something human, something real. Jayla, too, found herself watching him differently. He was still her boss, still the man whose name carried weight across the city, but when she looked at him now, she didn't see just power. she saw a man who worked too late, who ate dinner alone, who kept his pain hidden behind expensive suits. And though she didn't understand why, she felt a quiet sadness for him. One afternoon, it started to rain again. The sky grew dark, and the sound of thunder echoed softly outside the large windows. Craig was in his study, staring at the same report for almost an hour without reading a word. Finally, he stood and walked out, drawn by the faint melody of a voice coming from the kitchen. Jayla was standing by the counter, washing dishes, humming a slow tune. The light from the window fell gently across her face, and for a brief moment, Craig just stood there, watching her. There was peace in the way she moved, in the way she carried herself despite her hard life. He cleared his throat lightly. She turned, startled. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you there," she said quickly, wiping her hands on a towel. Craig smiled. "You have a beautiful voice," he said simply. Her cheeks warmed. "Thank you, sir," she murmured. He leaned against the doorway, his expression softer than usual. "You know, you don't have to be so formal all the time." She looked down at the sink, unsure how to respond. "It's hard not to, sir. You're my boss." He chuckled quietly. "Yes? But maybe for a few minutes, I can just be Craig." Jayla hesitated, then smiled a little. "All right, Craig," she said softly, testing the word like it didn't belong in her mouth. He nodded, pleased, though he didn't know why the sound of his name from her voice made something stir inside him. From that day, the walls between them began to thin. Their conversations grew longer. Sometimes, when she finished her work early, they would talk about little things, her dreams before her mother got sick, his childhood before wealth became a burden. Craig listened in a way no one ever had before, and Jayla spoke in a way she never thought she could. But not everyone in the mansion approved. Mrs. Green, the older housekeeper, noticed the growing closeness. One morning, as Jayla cleaned the living room, Mrs. Green spoke in a low, serious tone. "Be careful, dear. Men like him, they don't see women like us the same way. It always ends with heartbreak." Jayla paused, her heart tightening. "It's not like that," she whispered, but even she didn't sound convinced. Later that night, Craig stood on the balcony, staring at the city lights. He thought of Jayla's laughter, her words, her warmth. For years, he had been surrounded by luxury, but starved of meaning. And now, for the first time, he felt alive. As the rain began again, Jayla walked past the hallway below, unaware that Craig's eyes followed her every step. There was something unspoken growing between them, fragile yet powerful. Neither of them knew where it was leading, but they both knew it was no longer just curiosity. Something deeper had begun to take root, and soon neither of them would be able to hide it. The days that followed felt heavier for both of them. Craig tried to act normal, but the truth had already changed him. Every time he saw Jayla pass by, every time he heard her soft voice echo through the halls, something inside him ached to be near her again. But Jayla had grown distant. She had stopped meeting his eyes, stopped talking unless it was about work. She was protecting herself, even though it hurt her to do so. One night, the mansion was quiet, except for the sound of soft rain against the windows. Craig sat alone in his study, staring at the fire flickering in the fireplace. He had spent his life chasing numbers, meetings, and deals, but tonight none of it mattered. All he could think about was her, the woman who had walked into his life by accident and somehow made him feel human again. He stood up suddenly, unable to take the silence anymore. He walked out into the hallway and stopped when he saw Jayla standing near the window, holding a small tray of tea. She turned when she heard his footsteps. "I didn't know you were still awake, sir," she said softly. Craig's eyes stayed on her. "You never call me Craig anymore," he said. She looked down, unsure how to answer. "It's better that way," she said quietly. He walked closer, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Better for who, Jayla? Because it doesn't feel better for me." Her breath trembled. "It's safer," she whispered. Craig stopped a few steps away from her. "I don't want safe anymore. I've lived in safe for too long. I want real." Jayla's eyes met his, her heart pounding. "You can't mean that," she said. "You don't know what you're saying." Craig shook his head. I know exactly what I'm saying. You think I don't see how people look at me, how they expect me to stay in my own world. But none of it matters when I'm around you. You make me see life differently, Jayla. You make me feel something I thought I'd lost. Tears filled her eyes, but she tried to smile. You don't have to say that, Craig. You're kind, but we both know how people will talk. I don't care, he said, his voice breaking a little. Let them talk. Let them say what they want. I only care about what's true. And what's true is that I've fallen in love with you. Jayla froze. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The rain grew heavier outside, the thunder soft but deep, like the world itself was listening. Craig took one more step closer until he was standing right in front of her. I don't want to live another day pretending, he continued softly. You showed me what it means to care again, what it means to have someone who sees the man, not the money. I don't want you to be my maid anymore, Jayla. I want you to be my heart. Her hands shook as she set the tray down on the table beside her. Her tears fell freely now. Craig, you don't know what this means to me, she whispered. But what if it doesn't work? What if people tear us apart? Craig smiled gently. Then we'll rebuild together, as long as you'll let me try. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Jayla gasped as he opened it to reveal a simple, elegant diamond ring. The reflection of the firelight danced across it, filling the room with a soft glow. Craig dropped to one knee. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from love. Jayla, will you marry me? The moment stood still. Her hands covered her mouth, her tears shining like glass. You can't be serious, she whispered. He looked up at her, his eyes calm and sure. I've never been more serious in my life. Jayla stepped closer, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. I don't have anything to give you, she said. Craig shook his head. You've already given me everything I needed. She let out a shaky laugh, her tears falling faster. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Craig, I'll marry you. Craig stood, his eyes glistening as he slid the ring onto her finger. For a long time, they just stood there, holding each other as the rain poured outside, washing away the fears and doubts that had once kept them apart. In that moment, it didn't matter who they were, what they owned, or where they came from. All that mattered was the promise they had just made. The weeks that followed were full of whispers and rumors, but neither of them cared. The wedding was small, simple, and beautiful. The ceremony was held in the garden behind the mansion, under the same golden sunlight that once shone on their awkward dinner table. Jayla wore a soft white dress that flowed like air, her hair tied neatly with a few curls framing her face. Craig stood beside her in a dark suit, smiling like a man who had finally found home. Mia was there too, wiping tears as she watched her best friend walk down the aisle. Even Mrs. Green smiled, her old warning replaced by quiet pride. When the vows were spoken, Craig's voice trembled as he said, "From the moment you walked into my life, I stopped being lonely." Jayla's voice was soft but strong as she replied, "And from the moment you saw me, I stopped feeling invisible." When they kissed, the guests clapped softly, and a gentle breeze passed through the garden like a blessing. It felt like the world itself had paused to watch love rewrite its own rules. That night, as the stars filled the sky, Jayla stood on the balcony of what was now their shared home. Craig came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Do you still think we're from different worlds?" he whispered. She smiled and leaned back against him. "Maybe," she said softly, "but love built a bridge between them." Craig kissed her forehead gently, his heart full. "Then we'll keep crossing it together," he said. And as the night breeze carried their laughter into the quiet city below, the mansion that once echoed with silence now sang with life, love, and the sound of two souls who had found their way home to each other. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that love doesn't always arrive wrapped in perfection or status. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in the most unexpected places, between two people who were never supposed to meet. Craig and Jayla came from different worlds, yet they found something deeper than class or power. They found humanity, kindness, and love that grew from understanding. If this story touched your heart, tell us what you learned from it in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. We always love seeing how far our stories travel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who'd resonate with it. And if you want more emotional stories like this one, subscribe to the channel so you'll be the first to see our next heart-touching story.